Imagine standing on a dark Colorado bridge in the middle of the night when suddenly you hear the distant sound of a train. The ground begins to shake. The whistle screams through the fog, yet no train ever appears in the daylight. Locals swear it's the phantom train that has haunted the Colorado Bridge for decades. When you think of Colorado, most people imagine wide-open skies, snowy mountaintops, or small towns surrounded by nature. But not every part of Colorado feels safe or welcoming. There are places where history left behind shadows, places where locals still whisper about the things they've seen, and one of those places is a lonely railway crossing known simply as the Colorado Bridge. The bridge itself looks ordinary during the day. It's an old steel structure built back in the early 1900s when trains were the lifeblood of America. It stretches over a canyon with steep rocky walls that seem to swallow sound. In the sunlight, the beams shine silver, and the wooden tracks creak softly as the wind blows through the gaps. But once the sun sets, this bridge changes completely. What seemed harmless in the daytime becomes eerie, and even those who don't believe in ghosts admit they feel a heavy presence when they step onto it at night. Locals describe it as a place frozen in time. The steel has rusted in spots. The wood is weathered, and weeds push up between the gravel. But the strangest part isn't how the bridge looks, it's how it feels. People say the air around the Colorado Bridge is different. It's colder than the surrounding area, as if the canyon holds on to the night. Some have even claimed that when they stand on the bridge, they feel the ground rumble beneath their feet, as though a train is approaching, even though no train has run across those tracks in decades. The bridge sits in an isolated stretch of Colorado, miles from the nearest town. There are no streetlights, no busy highways nearby, no sounds of people or cars. When you're standing there at night, all you hear is the whisper of the wind through the canyon and the occasional cry of a distant animal. The darkness there is thicker than most places, so dark that you can't see your own hands stretched out in front of you. And that is the moment when people say the haunting begins. Before the ghost stories, before the soldiers' terrifying encounters, the Colorado Bridge already had a reputation for tragedy. Old newspapers tell of accidents that happened there, workers injured during construction, trains that almost derailed, and rumors of at least one crash that ended in lives lost. Records from that time aren't always complete, but enough hints remain to convince locals that the bridge was scarred by death from the very beginning. Generations of families have passed down warnings about the bridge. Some parents used to tell their children not to play near the canyon, not just because of the steep cliffs, but because of the sounds that came from the tracks at night. People heard whistles in the darkness. Long after the rail company had stopped using the line, they felt vibrations under their feet when the bridge should have been silent. It was as if the land itself refused to let go of the trains that once thundered across its beams. The bridge became a gathering place for thrill seekers and curious visitors. Teenagers dared each other to walk across at midnight, holding flashlights that barely cut through the thick fog that often rolled in. Many of them returned shaken, swearing they'd heard the shriek of brakes or the sound of iron wheels grinding against rails. Some claimed they saw lights in the distance, dim, flickering lanterns that moved too smoothly to be carried by people. When the lights reached the bridge, they vanished, leaving only the smell of smoke in the cold air. It's this combination of isolation, history, and mystery that makes the Colorado Bridge such a chilling setting. Unlike a haunted house, there are no walls here to make you feel trapped, yet somehow the wide-open canyon feels even more suffocating. The silence presses in on you, broken only by sounds you can't explain, and always in the back of your mind is the question, what if the phantom train really does appear? Locals will tell you that the bridge doesn't just look haunted, it feels alive. Some describe an invisible weight pressing on their chest when they stand in the middle of it. Others say they've felt a sudden blast of cold air rushing past them as though a train were flying by. A few insist they've heard voices, faint and distant, calling out over the canyon like passengers trapped in an endless ride. During the day, these stories sound like exaggerations, the kind of tales people tell to scare tourists or entertain children. But at night, when you're standing alone on the bridge with nothing but the moonlight and the sound of your own heartbeat, the stories don't feel so silly. Every creak of wood beneath your boots makes you stop and listen. Every gust of wind that howls through the beams makes you wonder if it's really just the wind. The bridge itself almost feels like a character in the story, as though it remembers everything that has happened there, from the workers who risked their lives to build it, to the trains that once carried soldiers, supplies, and families across the canyon, to the unexplained tragedies that stained its history. It holds all of it, and maybe, just maybe, it still echoes with those memories today. This is why the Colorado Bridge became the perfect stage for what would happen later. Soldiers on training exercises didn't just stumble into a random spot. They were standing on a site with a history of fear and whispers, a place already charged with mystery and tragedy. When they saw what they saw, when they heard what they heard, it was in a setting designed almost like a trap for the human imagination. A lonely bridge in the dark, surrounded by silence with nowhere to run if something unnatural appeared. So, before the ghost train itself even arrives in the story, the bridge already has power. It sets the mood, it creates the fear, and it makes even the bravest people second-guess what's real and what's just in their minds. That's the kind of place the Colorado Bridge is, a location that turns ordinary nights into terrifying memories, and a setting that makes every strange sound feel like a warning of something about to happen. After the Colorado Bridge had already gained its unsettling reputation, the first reports of strange encounters began to circulate. These weren't just campfire stories told by teenagers. They came from people who had every reason to tell the truth. Railroad workers, engineers, and men who had no interest in ghosts or legends. The earliest accounts date back decades, long before the line was abandoned. Railroad crews working the late-night shifts started whispering about unusual events. At first, it was the sounds. Workers stationed near the canyon swore they could hear the whistle of a train echoing through the night. It was distinct, long, and mournful, the kind of sound that cuts straight into your chest. But when they checked the schedule, no train was expected, and when they waited to see if an engine would pass, the tracks remained empty, glistening in the moonlight. Engineers were among the first to share their experiences. Imagine being a man trained to keep his head clear, responsible for tons of steel and cargo moving at dangerous speeds. These weren't men easily fooled. Yet more than one engineer reported seeing lights ahead of them on the tracks, glowing golden lights that looked like the lanterns on an approaching train. The problem was, the line was clear. No trains should have been there. The lights would appear suddenly in the distance, hover in the fog, and then fade away as though they had melted into the night air. Workers also complained about the bridge itself. Some claimed that, as they walked across during inspections, the wooden planks beneath their boots began to vibrate. It felt like a massive train was crossing just behind them, even though the bridge was empty. They described the sensation of pressure in the air, the rush of wind against their clothes, and the unmistakable rattling of steel beams, sounds that should only happen when tons of iron were rolling overhead. But when they turned, there was nothing. Only darkness and the long stretch of empty track fading into mist. Local townsfolk began adding their own stories. Families living within earshot of the bridge reported hearing the sound of a train thundering across late at night. They'd wake to the windows shaking and the distant shriek of brakes. But when they asked around the next morning, others confirmed no train had run at that hour. In fact, some of the reports came years after the railway had been shut down completely. One farmer told of standing outside his barn, one foggy evening, listening to the distant chug of an old steam engine. It grew louder and louder until it sounded like the train must be passing right through his property. He even said he could smell smoke on the breeze. But when he hurried to the road to catch a glimpse, there was nothing, just silence and the heavy, eerie fog. His animals were restless that night, pacing their pens and refusing to settle until dawn. The story spread further when travelers started to share what they had seen. Hikers passing through the canyon reported strange glowing orbs of light floating near the bridge. At first, they thought these were just lanterns being carried by locals or other campers. But the lights moved too smoothly, too fast, and too silently. They traced a perfect line along the tracks, like headlights on an invisible train. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they blinked out, leaving the witnesses shaken and confused. Over time, patterns started to emerge. Witnesses didn't just describe seeing strange lights or hearing whistles. They often reported a specific time around midnight. Many of the encounters seemed to happen in the deep hours of the night when the fog was thickest and the canyon was at its most silent. Midnight became known as the active hour for the Colorado Bridge, the time when the ghost train made its presence known. The fear deepened when a small group of railroad workers had what they described as a shared encounter. They were repairing sections of the track late at night when they all heard the sound of an engine approaching. The whistle blew so loudly they instinctively stepped off the tracks, expecting a massive locomotive to barrel down on them. They waited, their hearts pounding, as the sound grew closer. The ground vibrated, their tools rattled against the rails, and one man swore he felt a rush of hot air blast past him. But no train ever arrived. The sound simply faded into the distance, as though the phantom had passed them by. All of the men later confirmed the same details, insisting they hadn't imagined it. That encounter gave the legend new strength. It was one thing when a single person claimed to hear or see something. It was easy to dismiss them as tired, mistaken, or exaggerating. But when a group of hardworking men experienced the exact same event at the same time, the story took on a new level of credibility. Even skeptics in the town admitted that something strange was happening at the bridge. Soon, people from nearby areas began traveling to the bridge specifically to test their courage. They'd go in groups, carrying flashlights, hoping to hear the phantom whistle or feel the rumble of invisible wheels. Some walked away disappointed, experiencing nothing at all, but others swore the haunting was real. One group of teenagers reported seeing the full silhouette of a train emerge from the fog, complete with glowing windows and the faint outlines of passengers inside. By the time they realized what they were looking at, the train had vanished into thin air, leaving them screaming and running back into town. Every new story added fuel to the fire. The bridge was no longer just a structure in the canyon. It was becoming a place of legend, a landmark tied forever to mystery and fear. For some, it was thrilling. For others, it was terrifying. And as the years went on, the encounters only grew more bizarre, preparing the stage for the night when soldiers themselves would witness the phantom train, a moment that would cement the Colorado Bridge as one of the most haunted places in the region. The stories of the Colorado Bridge were already well known among locals, but the legend took on an entirely new weight when the U.S. military became part of it. This was not the account of thrill-seeking teenagers or overworked railroad men. This was the testimony of trained soldiers, men who prided themselves on courage, discipline, and clear thinking. And what they experienced on one cold, foggy night would become one of the most terrifying encounters ever connected to the phantom train. It happened during a set of training exercises near the canyon. A unit of soldiers had been stationed in the area, using the rugged terrain of Colorado to practice night maneuvers. These weren't men expecting ghosts. Their focus was on drills, endurance, and survival skills. But on that night, the military's strict order and discipline would collide with the unexplained. The soldiers marched in formation across the valley as darkness fell, their boots crunching against the gravel. Their path eventually led them to the Colorado Bridge. At first, it was just another landmark to cross. They had no idea of its haunted reputation, no idea that locals avoided the site after sundown. To them, it was nothing more than a steel structure silhouetted against the night sky, its frame glowing faintly in the pale light of the moon. As they approached, the fog began to thicken. It rolled in from the canyon floor, curling around their legs and rising higher until it seemed to swallow the bridge. Visibility dropped quickly. Flashlights barely cut through the mist, and the beam of light seemed to dissolve after just a few feet. The men grew uneasy but pressed on. After all, soldiers are trained not to fear the dark. Then it started. The first sign was a distant sound, low, rhythmic, and almost unnoticeable at first. The soldiers assumed it was part of the environment. Maybe the wind echoing strangely through the canyon, or rocks shifting in the distance. But soon it grew louder. One by one, they began to recognize the sound for what it was, the distinct, steady chugging of a train engine. Some of the men laughed nervously, brushing it off. Probably just an old truck backfiring somewhere, one muttered. But then came the whistle. It pierced through the night with such force that several soldiers instinctively dropped to the ground, thinking it was a real locomotive barreling down on them. The sound was unmistakable, the long, mournful wail of a steam engine from a bygone era. The fog grew even thicker, swirling around their boots, curling against the steel beams of the bridge. The vibrations started next. The men felt it beneath their feet, the ground trembling, the iron rails rattling. Their training told them to stay calm, to analyze, to think. But there was no logical explanation. The line had been abandoned for years. No train should be there. Yet the unmistakable signs of a massive engine were all around them. Then, out of the fog it appeared. The soldiers later described it the same way, their accounts nearly identical. A massive locomotive materialized in the mist, glowing faintly with a pale, almost silver light. Sparks flickered from the wheels, but there was no sound of metal on metal, only the ghostly echo of movement. Behind the engine were cars filled with shadowy figures. Through the foggy windows, the soldiers claimed to see passengers, dozens of them, sitting motionless. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark, their expressions blank, as if staring out at the living world from another plane of existence. One soldier swore he locked eyes with a passenger. He said it was like looking into the face of death itself. Cold, hollow, yet aware. The image haunted him for the rest of his life. Panic rippled through the unit. Some men shouted warnings, others scrambled off the bridge thinking the train was going to run them down. But as quickly as it had appeared, the phantom began to fade. The glowing engine passed through the soldiers without a single touch, vanishing into the night air. The sounds of the whistle and chugging echoed one last time, then silence fell. Only the fog remained, curling gently as if nothing had happened. When the men regrouped, the silence was heavy. These weren't superstitious civilians. They were trained to face gunfire, explosions, and the horrors of combat. Yet what they had just seen left them shaken to the core. Several men admitted openly that they had been terrified. Their hands trembled, their voices cracked, and some refused to step back onto the bridge again. The commanding officer tried to regain control, insisting that stress, fatigue, or even tricks of the fog had caused the hallucination. But deep down, even he couldn't explain the perfect alignment of what the entire unit had witnessed. Every soldier had seen the same train, heard the same whistle, and felt the same vibrations. Hallucinations don't strike dozens of people in the exact same way at the exact same time. Word of the encounter spread quietly at first. The military didn't want to draw attention to it, but soldiers talk, and stories have a way of slipping out. Soon, the tale of the phantom train seen by U.S. soldiers on the Colorado Bridge became part of local legend for the townsfolk. It was proof. If disciplined men of the military could be shaken by something supernatural, then surely the ghost train was real. Even years later, some of the surviving soldiers refused to discuss what happened. A few admitted in private that the memory haunted them more than combat itself. One veteran, long after his retirement, described it in simple words: "I've seen war, I've seen death, but nothing chilled me like that train." That night on the Colorado Bridge sealed the phantom train's reputation. What had once been whispered folklore was now backed by the testimony of men who had faced danger in the real world and still come away convinced that something otherworldly haunted the canyon. And for many who live near the bridge today, the soldier's story is all the proof they need that the phantom train is more than just a tale. It is a chilling reality, one that appears when the fog is thick, the night is still, and the clock strikes midnight. When word of the soldiers' terrifying encounter at the Colorado Bridge spread through the nearby towns, it did more than stir curiosity. It gave new breath to the old stories that had lived in the region for generations. Suddenly, the bridge wasn't just an abandoned stretch of iron and wood hanging over a canyon. It became a gateway to something unexplainable, a place where the line between the past and the present blurred. People who had always whispered about strange noises and eerie lights now felt validated, and those who had never believed in such tales found themselves second-guessing everything. Old-timers in the community were quick to remind everyone that the stories didn't begin with the soldiers. Decades earlier, there had been rumors of tragedy tied to the bridge. Some insisted that a train had once derailed there, plunging into the canyon below. The records of the accident were incomplete, but bits and pieces of evidence seemed to support the claim. Mentions in old newspapers, scattered lawsuits, hints of lives cut short. In this telling, the phantom train is nothing more than the shadow of that disaster, doomed to repeat the final horrifying journey over and over again. Those who died never made it to their destination, and in their grief and pain, they became part of the ghostly machine, forever bound to the tracks. Others whispered about darker beginnings. There were those who swore the railroad itself had been cursed. Some said the company that built it made a deal to ensure its success, a bargain with forces best left unnamed. The cost, they claimed, was that one train was condemned to ride eternally, appearing long after the steel and steam had disappeared from the world. According to this story, the whistle that pierces the night is not simply a replay of history, but a cry of suffering from something that can never rest. The pale figures seen through the windows are not ordinary passengers, but prisoners of the curse, chained to their seats for all eternity. Not everyone tied the story to passengers, though. A chilling theory began to spread after the soldiers' encounter, one that claimed the ghost train didn't carry civilians at all. Instead, it was a spectral troop train carrying soldiers from wars long past. Colorado had seen many trains move troops during the First and Second World Wars, and some wondered if the Phantom train was one that never finished its journey. According to this version, the faces in the windows are the restless dead of war, soldiers who never came home, still traveling endlessly through the night. For believers in this tale, the fact that modern soldiers witnessed the event wasn't just coincidence, it was recognition, one band of warriors seeing another across the boundary of death. Paranormal investigators who came to the bridge had their own explanations. Many suggested it was what they called a residual haunting. They explained that certain places absorb energy like a recording etched into the very ground. When conditions are right, like when the fog rolls in, when the night is perfectly still, or when the moon hangs low in the sky, that energy replays. What people see isn't a conscious ghost, but an echo of something that once happened. The train never really arrives, it only appears to, a memory of iron and fire and screams burned into the bridge itself. This theory comforted some because it removed the idea of intelligent spirits deliberately haunting the area. But for those who stood on the bridge and felt the vibration of phantom wheels beneath their feet, it was no less terrifying. And of course, every town has its darkest whispers. Some locals claimed the bridge itself was cursed, calling it a devil's bridge. They said no good could ever come from building such a structure, that the land beneath it was claimed by something malevolent long before the first tracks were laid. In their version, the Phantom train isn't tied to any accident or curse upon a locomotive, but to the bridge itself, which acts as a doorway for the unholy. The fog, the sounds, the hollow faces in the windows are not echoes or memories at all, but deliberate signs, warnings meant to frighten anyone bold enough to cross. The stories don't end with legends, though. Personal accounts keep the fear alive. Retired officers admit they avoided the bridge at night, unwilling to face whatever might be there. Hikers tell of seeing pale figures standing on the tracks, vanishing into mist when they approached. Drivers claim their car windows rattled from the whistle of a train they could never see. Teenagers, curious and reckless, have tried to call out to the ghost train. One group placed candles on the tracks, performing a seance, only to watch the flames snuff out at once as the roar of something massive rushed through the canyon. They fled, certain they had summoned the Phantom itself. Every version of the story, every whispered account, carries the same weight: fear. Even those who say they don't believe admit that something about the bridge unsettles them. The silence feels too heavy, the air too thick, as though the place itself remembers. Some never go back after one visit, swearing the experience was enough for a lifetime. Others return again and again, chasing the thrill, hoping to catch another glimpse of the impossible. But whether it is tragedy, curse, soldiers lost in time, or the devil's handiwork, the truth is that the Phantom train refuses to be forgotten. Once you hear the whistle echo across the canyon, once you feel the ground tremble under your feet with the weight of something that isn't there, you never leave the bridge empty. You carry the story with you, passing it on to the next listener, ensuring that the legend of the Colorado Bridge never fades. And maybe that is the true power of the Phantom train. Not only that it terrifies those who see it, but that it lingers in the minds of everyone who hears about it. A mystery that grows darker and deeper with every retelling. For every legend, there are always stories from those who claim to have seen it with their own eyes, and the Phantom train of the Colorado Bridge is no exception. The soldiers may have been the ones who brought the tale back into the spotlight, But they were not the first, and certainly not the last. Long before their terrifying night, locals had been quietly sharing their encounters, hesitant to speak too loudly, afraid of being laughed at or called superstitious. Yet when the soldier's story broke, suddenly those witnesses felt vindicated. They began to come forward, some for the first time in decades, recounting the nights when they too had heard the whistle that wasn't there or seen lights blazing across the bridge where no train should be. One of the earliest accounts came from a railroad worker in the late 1940s. He was assigned to inspect the bridge for structural wear and would often find himself out there long after sunset, the canyon winds howling through the steel beams. According to his diary, one night he heard the unmistakable sound of an engine approaching, the kind that made the tracks hum before the train even came into sight. He stood to the side, waiting for it to pass, but no train appeared. The vibration faded, and the night went silent again. He never mentioned it to his supervisors, but in his private writings he confessed he was too shaken to ever step onto the bridge at night again. Decades later, in the 1970s, a local couple claimed to have seen something far stranger. They were driving near the canyon late at night when they noticed lights flashing across the bridge. Thinking it was odd for a train to run at that hour, they stopped and watched. They swore they saw a full passenger train, windows glowing, moving silently along the tracks. What unsettled them most was not just the sight, but what they noticed inside. They claimed they could see people sitting in the cars, their faces pale and expressionless, staring out at nothing. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the train vanished into the fog, leaving the bridge empty. They told their family but avoided speaking of it in public for fear of ridicule. Stories like these might have remained forgotten, if not for the brave few who insisted on investigating the bridge themselves. In the early 1990s, a group of college students decided to test the legend. They camped near the canyon, armed with flashlights and an old camcorder. Around midnight, they reported hearing the whistle so loud it seemed to echo through their bones. The camera footage, though grainy, captured faint lights moving across the span of the bridge. The students screamed as the sound of wheels on tracks thundered by, yet when they ran to look, the bridge was completely empty. Their tapes circulated among friends and locals, adding fuel to the growing legend. Not all the testimonies came from thrill seekers. Some were from people who wanted nothing to do with ghost stories. A retired police officer once admitted that during his night patrols, he refused to cross the bridge after dark. He explained that he had tried once years earlier, and in the middle of the crossing he heard a piercing whistle behind him. When he turned, headlights were bearing down on him. He braced himself for impact, but the lights and sound vanished before his eyes. After that, he always took the long way around, telling his colleagues that no duty was worth tempting fate on that bridge. One of the most chilling testimonies came from a lone hiker in the early 2000s. He had decided to take a shortcut across the bridge at dusk, despite warnings from locals. Halfway across, he claimed he felt the ground begin to tremble beneath his feet, just like when a heavy train is about to roar by. He froze as the air filled with the sound of screeching metal and the shriek of a whistle that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Looking up, he saw a massive engine charging toward him, its front lantern blazing with unnatural light. But when he shut his eyes in terror and opened them again, the bridge was empty, silent, and still. The hiker admitted he dropped to his knees and crawled the rest of the way across, convinced the bridge itself wanted to throw him into the canyon. He vowed never to return. There were also smaller accounts, brief but unsettling. Families picnicking near the canyon swore they heard the whistle even in broad daylight. Drivers passing along the road beside the bridge claimed to see a sudden flash of light as if a train was speeding by, though none had run that line in years. Children told stories of hearing footsteps on the tracks while exploring, footsteps that seemed too heavy, too rhythmic, like the march of boots or the pounding of wheels. Each account added another thread to the tapestry of fear, weaving together a legend that refused to die. Skeptics tried to explain it away, suggesting the sounds were echoes from distant trains, or that the lights were tricks of the fog and moonlight. Yet the witnesses themselves never wavered. They spoke with conviction, their eyes wide and voices steady, insisting that what they saw and heard was real. To them, there was no mistaking the phantom train. It was not imagination or coincidence. It was something that lingered, something that belonged to the bridge and the canyon, something that demanded to be noticed. What makes these testimonies so powerful is not just the consistency of the details, but the emotion behind them. People do not lightly admit to seeing things that others will scoff at. Many of the witnesses had nothing to gain and much to lose by speaking up, yet they did. And their voices carry weight because each story, no matter how different, points to the same haunting image, a train that no longer exists, still crossing a bridge that should be silent. Over the years, these accounts have kept the legend alive. They are the reason people continue to visit the bridge, hoping to catch their own glimpse of the impossible. They are the fuel that keeps the story of the phantom train burning through the decades. And they serve as a reminder that sometimes the scariest thing is not what one person sees in the dark, but what countless others have seen again and again, each telling the same story with trembling voices. For those who have heard the whistle themselves, there is no question left to answer. The phantom train is real. It is there, hidden in the fog and the silence, waiting for the next witness to step onto the bridge and carry the legend forward. When the stories of the phantom train grew too loud to ignore, it was only natural that investigators would come. Some were professionals with equipment and credentials, others were amateurs with curiosity and flashlights, but all of them came with the same purpose: to uncover the truth about the Colorado Bridge and the train that should no longer exist. What they discovered only added more fuel to the mystery, leaving behind recordings, photographs, and experiences that defied explanation. One of the first serious investigations took place in the late 1980s. A small group of paranormal researchers traveled to the bridge after hearing years of rumors. They set up tape recorders along the tracks, hoping to capture anything unusual. At first, the night was calm, with only the sound of wind moving through the canyon. But just after midnight, one of the recorders picked up a faint whistle. When they played it back, the sound grew louder and clearer, as if the train had passed directly over the microphone. The odd part was that none of the investigators had heard the sound with their own ears while it was happening. On the tapes, it was undeniable. In person, it had been silence. Another team in the early 1990s brought video cameras, bulky and primitive compared to today's technology, but good enough to record what they saw. Standing at a distance, they pointed their lenses toward the bridge and waited. What appeared on the tape later stunned them. Faint, glowing lights moved slowly across the span of the bridge just where the tracks lay. The investigators swore that they hadn't seen the lights with their eyes, but the camera had. When they tried to rationalize it as reflections from passing cars, they checked the road nearby and found nothing. The bridge was isolated, and the fog only made the lights on the video more mysterious. The 2000s brought more sophisticated equipment: thermal cameras, motion sensors, electromagnetic field detectors. All were set up on the bridge by dedicated paranormal teams. One group claimed that their thermal camera picked up shapes inside the fog that didn't match the environment. They described them as long, rectangular, moving slowly in a line across the bridge, as though a train of heatless, ghostly cars was sliding past. On another night, a motion sensor placed near the middle of the bridge went off repeatedly, detecting vibrations that should have been caused by something massive moving over the structure. Yet the investigators stood on either end of the bridge watching and saw nothing but mist. Skeptics also visited the site, hoping to prove once and for all that it was nothing but imagination. Some brought sound equipment to measure echoes. They argued that the whistle people heard was simply the call of a distant train bouncing off canyon walls in strange ways. But then came the problem. The closest active train lines were miles away, far too distant for their whistles to be heard so clearly. Even if echoes carried across the canyon, they could not explain why the sounds always came at the same time of night, or why people described the vibration of invisible wheels beneath their feet. One particularly well-documented case came from a radio host who specialized in the supernatural. He brought his crew to the bridge, recording a live broadcast as they waited for something to happen. Just after midnight, the audio picked up the distant rumble of wheels, growing louder, shaking the microphones. His audience listened in real time as the crew shouted in shock, insisting the sound was surrounding them. Yet when they returned in the daylight to examine the tracks, there was nothing, no sign of any real train having passed. For weeks afterward, listeners debated what they had heard, and the host swore it was the most unexplainable event of his career. There were also photographs, though many were blurry or inconclusive. Some showed strange, misty shapes moving along the tracks. Others revealed faint glowing orbs hovering above the bridge. A few even seemed to capture outlines of train cars, faint but visible, with square windows glowing against the dark. Critics dismissed these as tricks of fog, reflections, or camera malfunctions. But for those who wanted to believe, the images were proof that something extraordinary lingered on that bridge. Even more compelling were the personal logs investigators left behind. In journals and notes, many of them described overwhelming feelings of dread while on the bridge. Some wrote that they felt watched, surrounded by unseen eyes. Others claimed their equipment failed without explanation. Batteries draining in minutes, devices shutting down the moment the whistle sounded. One team reported that their compass needles spun wildly when they placed them on the tracks, refusing to settle until they were taken away from the bridge. Not all evidence was technical. Some came from direct human experiences. A well-known medium once visited the bridge, standing silently in the fog while others watched. She later claimed she could hear voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, whispering and crying out. She described seeing soldiers in uniform and families clutching their belongings, all sitting in cars that no longer existed. The most chilling detail she offered was that they seemed aware of her, some even turning their heads to look at her before fading back into the mist. For all of these investigations, one thing remained constant. No one could explain the phenomenon away completely. Scientific minds tried, but they could not account for the consistency of the reports or the sheer number of witnesses who described the same sights and sounds across decades. Paranormal believers took it as proof that the Colorado Bridge was one of the most active haunted locations in the region. Skeptics, even after their best attempts, often left unsettled, unwilling to cross the bridge alone at night again. The weight of evidence, audio, video, photographs, testimonies, built up year after year until the legend became something more than folklore. It became a documented mystery. Whether the phantom train is a lingering energy replaying itself, a gathering of restless spirits, or a trick of nature no one yet understands, it has resisted every attempt at explanation. And with each new recording, with every new witness trembling as they tell their story, the case against the bridge grows stronger. The investigations didn't put an end to the legend. They cemented it. They ensured that the phantom train would not fade into rumor, but live on as a documented phenomenon, a story that is both terrifying and tantalizing, because no one has ever been able to close it. Every test, every experiment, every late-night vigil only adds more weight to the mystery. And in the end, the bridge remains, stretching over the canyon, waiting for the next midnight when the whistle will blow, the lights will blaze, and the phantom train will once again make its impossible journey across the tracks of the living and the dead. The Colorado Bridge stands quiet most days, just another relic of the past, weathered by wind and time. Yet for those who know its story, it is more than steel and wood stretched across a canyon. It is a place of memory, of mystery, of fear. Every ghost story needs a heart, and for the people who live near the bridge, the phantom train has become that heartbeat. The tale has grown too large to be dismissed, too many voices repeating the same chilling details to be ignored. And as the years pass, the legend doesn't fade. If anything, it grows stronger, feeding on the curiosity of each new generation that dares to set foot on the tracks after dark. Children grow up hearing the whistle in bedtime stories, told by parents who pretend not to believe but lower their voices, just enough to keep the fear alive. Teenagers dare each other to walk across the bridge at midnight, laughing to hide their nerves, until one of them swears they feel the ground vibrate beneath their feet. Locals shake their heads at outsiders who dismiss it, saying they'll change their minds once they hear the cry of the train for themselves. Even tourists who stumble onto the tale by chance find themselves drawn in, compelled to visit the spot where countless others claim to have stood in awe and terror as the phantom roared by. The soldiers' encounter gave the legend new life, but it is the unending stream of personal stories that keeps it alive. People still come forward, some timid, some bold, but all sharing the same haunted look in their eyes as they describe what they experienced. They talk of headlights blazing where there should be only darkness, of the high-pitched shriek of a whistle cutting through the fog, of faces in windows staring with blank, lifeless eyes. These aren't tales told for attention or profit. They are memories carved into the people who lived them, impossible to forget. In time, the phantom train became more than just a story passed around campfires or whispered in diners. It became a part of the community's identity. Some see it as a tragedy repeating itself, others as a curse, still others as a bridge between the living and the dead. But all agree on one thing: something is there. Something waits on that bridge when the hour grows late. Something that doesn't belong in the world of the living but refuses to leave. Researchers and skeptics continue to test it, trying to strip the mystery away with science and reason. They record, measure, analyze, and explain, yet none of their answers fully account for the stories. Even the most rational voices hesitate when they recall the vibrations, the inexplicable sounds, the sense of being watched. And each failure to explain only strengthens the legend, giving it more power, more weight, more permanence. The phantom train doesn't need proof to survive. It only needs to be seen once, heard once, felt once, and its reality is carried forward forever in the memory of that witness. There is something timeless about the legend. Trains themselves are relics of an earlier era, machines of iron and fire that carried hopes, dreams, and sometimes tragedy across the land. Perhaps that is why the phantom train resonates so deeply. It represents both the past that refuses to be forgotten and the thin line between history and haunting. Standing on the Colorado Bridge at midnight surrounded by fog, it is easy to feel that the world has slipped backward in time, that at any moment the whistle will pierce the silence and the glowing cars will slide across the tracks, carrying their ghostly passengers to nowhere. And so the legend lives on. Every retelling adds another layer, another voice to the chorus of fear. Every visit to the bridge brings the possibility of another testimony, another photograph, another piece of evidence. The story doesn't die because it is more than rumor. It is experience. It is memory. It is the kind of mystery that becomes part of a place, woven into the very air and soil. The Colorado Bridge is not just a landmark. It is a stage, and the phantom train is its eternal performance. For those who have never seen it, the legend is just a story, eerie but distant. But for those who have stood on the bridge when the fog rolled in and the night grew too quiet, for those who have felt the ground hum beneath their feet with the weight of something invisible, the story becomes a scar. They never forget the sound of the whistle or the sight of lights that vanish into nothingness. They never walk away unchanged, and they never stop talking about it. That is how legends endure, not in books or films, but in the trembling voices of those who swear they saw the impossible. As long as the bridge stands, the phantom train will live. It doesn't matter if the tracks rust away, if the steel gives in to time, if the world forgets the history of the railroad, the train will still come. It will still appear when the conditions are right, when the night is thick and the fog curls low across the canyon. The whistle will still echo, the lights will still blaze, and the passengers will still stare out with hollow eyes. And someone, standing in the wrong place at the wrong time, will witness it. They will leave the bridge shaken, their heart racing, their minds searching for explanations that never satisfy. And they will carry the legend forward, ensuring that the story of the Colorado Bridge will never truly fade. In the end, the phantom train is not just about fear, it is about mystery, the kind that defies answers and lives forever because of it. It is about the human need to explain the unexplainable, to attach meaning to the shadows in the dark. Whether it is tragedy, curse, or some unknown natural phenomenon, the phantom train has become larger than its cause. It is now a legend, and legends do not die. They only grow. So when you hear the whistle echo across the canyon, when you feel the air grow heavy and the tracks tremble beneath your feet, remember that you are not alone. Countless others have stood in the same spot, felt the same terror, and carried it with them into the world beyond the bridge. That is why the phantom train endures, why it will always endure, because once you witness it, you are part of its story, and stories, especially those drenched in fear and mystery, are forever.